It's the first day of my trip to Oslo in Norway. It's the first time I've been to Norway, so didn't really know too much what to expect. Been to Stockholm before a few years ago in Sweden. So far, I'm not sure what to make of it. I got in late last night, so I didn't really see anything. The hotel was fine, and it seems to be very similar to Stockholm. What I will say, everything's really, firstly, very, very expensive. I mean, last night I bought a hot dog with a drink just at the bus station, and it cost me £5 about approximately, well, more than that probably, which is ridiculous. So I suppose my hotel, which is just over £100 for 3 days, is quite a bargain. I also got the Oslo Pass, which is for 48 hours, and it's for every museum or public transport, and that's at 269, I think, krona, which is just over £20. So that actually, I think, is going to prove to be really good value, and it also takes away a lot of hassle. The first museum that I decided to visit is the Museum, which is like you get all over Europe, one of those ones where they've reconstructed houses from all over the country, and I thought I'd do that because it's quite nice and quiet. You can wander around and I can get a sense of the wider country rather than just the capital, which is obviously where I'm going to be staying. I'm sat in the middle of a village in Telemark, which is the province around Norway. And so far it's been really interesting, and particularly the apartment building, which had different apartments from different eras. And one of them, I think the top apartment, was decorated in the era of Henrik Ibsen, when he wrote The Doll's House, which is a play. It's very, very famous, but I think it's the most performed play ever, in which a woman, I think her name's Nora, breaks free of middle-class conformity and leaves the doll's house, you know, the perfect home that she has with a perfect family. Of course, it's not also perfect, and that's really quite a pertinent message even today, because I know people today who are not happy, but you know, if you ask them, well, why don't you change something, they'll say, oh well, what about my new kitchen, or what about my cat, what about my dog, what about whatever. And so yeah, you know, the play may be over 100 years old, but the message is probably quite timeless. Getting back to Norway, I'm going to have a look round. My reading material is of course a Joe Nesbø novel, which I'm really enjoying. I've read loads of his before. I hope I'm going to eat at Schroeder's later, which is where the famous detective Harry Hole always has a bite to eat. So that's a plan for later. I also want to visit some of the other museums, the Viking Museum, the Kon-Tiki Museum, but for now let's go exploring the byways of rural Norway. I'm still at the Folk Museum, but we're moving slowly up north through the provinces of Norway. So I'm about halfway up now, and I've got all these beautiful kind of rustic rural buildings around me, and they were reminding me of something, and I couldn't think what it was. And now I've got it, and it's this show that I used to watch as a kid, and I actually think the show was German. I don't think it was Norwegian at all, but it was called Silas, and it was about this kid. He was probably 9 or 10 years old, and he used to have all these adventures, and he rode about on a horse, and he used to just hang out in like rural places like this with all these kind of rustic wooden buildings, and everybody looked knackered. And he had all these brilliant adventures, and there was a lady called the Shrew who was always getting him into trouble, but they were kind of friends as well. And it had really good theme music, and I'm just trying to think, it went something like dun 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 dun, I think, or that might have been another show, to be honest. Anyway, I am now in Silas World, and it's ace, and I love it. So yeah, okay. Oh, by the way, going back on the price thing, I got my water. I've been sat working out the differences. Here's my bottle of water. and this cost me the equivalent of £2 in English money, and they're about £1 in England. So I'm looking at this, looking at the hot dog as well, which probably would have been about £3 with the drink last night. I'm going to guess that prices here are roughly double what I pay back home. See you later. I'm in the Viking Boat Museum now, which is a museum of 3 Viking ships that they've excavated from burial mounds. It's remarkable to think that this craft here has actually been buried for well over a millennium. It's still so well preserved. This is really interesting to me because I've become interested in the Vikings and their links with the Celts. We went to Orkney earlier this year and seen the influences of their culture in the Orkney Islands and also in Ireland, and of course in Britain as well. And to see this kind of ship, I mean, this was actually only a royal barge, they reckon, and didn't go on long voyages, but to see ships like this that went all the way possibly to America, down to Kiev, around the Mediterranean, it's unbelievable. Also pretty remarkable is the building in which it's housed in. It's a really distinctive Scandinavian style from the turn of the 19th to the 20th century. I'm sat now in front of the ship Ra 2, which was constructed by traditional boat builders in Africa and sailed by Thor Heyerdahl and his crew across the Atlantic Ocean from Africa to the Caribbean. The idea being that Thor Heyerdahl thought that perhaps in ancient times, reed boats, which until then people had previously thought could only work on rivers or pretty small coastal journeys, could actually cross the open sea. Who is this Thor Heyerdahl? He was a Norwegian explorer. He's dead now. He died in 2002, and I first came across him when I read the book The Tigris Expedition, which tells the story of when he made a similar boat bigger than this one, and he sailed it basically around the Arabian Peninsula to show that these boats could actually be manoeuvred, whereas before it was thought they just kind of floated along without much steering. That book I thought was amazing. It reminded me very much of Tim Severin's Brendan Voyage, which was inspired by the work of Thor Heyerdahl. He did it first. But the Tigris expedition was actually the 4th of Thor's expeditions. This was the 3rd. The 2nd was an unsuccessful Ra 1, which aimed to do the same thing, and that didn't work. After two weeks the boat started taking water and sank, and they think it was due to a mistake in the actual construction. Obviously he did prove that they could have crossed the Atlantic in ancient times. Whether they did or not is another matter. But the most famous one, and that's what this museum's all about that I'm in now, is the Kon-Tiki. And he had a theory that after looking at Peruvian bull giraffes, you know, that the ancient Incas used, that maybe they could have crossed the Pacific and gone to Polynesia, and perhaps the Polynesians were descended from the Incas or the other American Indians. That was really controversial. Every archaeologist said you were mad, it's impossible, bull giraffes, like reed rafts, can't cross the open sea, and with the Kon-Tiki he proved that they could, which is what made him famous. he was also a very great internationalist. He said, you know, that we're human beings, we're not different nations. So we always sailed the UN flag with the multinational crew, including people from developing countries. And in fact, the boat that isn't here today is the Tigris, because he burned it in protest at weapons sales from developed countries to developing countries, which is sad because we don't have the boat, but quite a strong statement. I've read the Kon-Tiki expedition, obviously I read the Tigris expedition. I also read another book, a kind of collection of Phil Heyerdahl's works, and I find him totally inspirational, and he has changed the face of archaeology and exploration. That's why I've come to this museum today, and I'm really glad that I did. And here we have the Kon-Tiki itself, which successfully crossed the Pacific Ocean. I mean, what's amazing is just how small these boats are, and it took them over 100 days to cross the Pacific. Can you imagine being stuck on that with about 5 or 6 other people for 100 days? I think that would be the biggest challenge, not going stir crazy. And apparently what he did is he wanted happy crews, and the way he achieved that is by trying to make the diet as varied as possible. Although on the Kon-Tiki it is said that although they bought food for 100 days, they didn't really need to eat any of it, or hardly any of it, because they caught so many fish on the way. Anyway, there she is, Kon-Tiki. I'm now in a different museum and on another famous ship. This one's called the Fram, and it's famous because this is what Amundsen sailed in to get to the Antarctic. Now, Roald Amundsen is a name that I know well from my childhood, because we were always taught about Captain Scott in the Antarctic, and basically Amundsen was the guy who beat him there. And I can never really quite understand why in a country like Britain with so many successes, Captain Scott always seemed to feature high on the itinerary as a failure. I think maybe the British like noble failures. But yeah, great man as he was, Amundsen beat him. It's also quite good because about 10-15 years ago I went on Scott's ship in Dundee, so now I've been on the other, and this is the ship that carried the man who first went all the way to the Antarctic. I'm now in my final museum of the day. I think I've done 6. I don't think I've ever hit so many museums in a day. Although this is more really an exhibition than a museum. It's the Nobel Prize Peace Centre. Alfred Nobel was Norwegian, of course, and he put the money forward for the Nobel Peace Prize. And it's just a place dedicated towards peace and looking at past and present winners. It is quite a humbling place to go to, and it's just so nice to see something where the message of peace has been promoted rather than militarism. And you know, because I have to say that in the last decade or so in Britain, everything seems to have become pro-military, you know, military this, our boys that. And whilst I'm not knocking the job that people do, guns are not the answer, and you know, and that's been proved by what's happened over the last decade. So, do you know what? Actually, come here, have a look at this kind of stuff instead, because you might get a bit further if you did. And the exhibition around me is one that somebody's taken of firing ranges, where people are taught to hate and shoot the enemy from all around the world. did was taking a trip out to the island. So my Oslo pass also covers me for the local kind of island bus. So I'm just going to go on a bit of a wee tour, go around. I think cities with water are the best kind of cities. And although I must admit, so far I prefer Stockholm. It's a pleasant city and there's a hell of a lot to see. And then tomorrow I'll see some more, but for now I'm just going to sit back and relax and let the scenery take over. Good night.